What's up? I have an amazing interview with one of my favorite podcast hosts, and I think you will really enjoy it. I definitely felt lucky to speak with someone so eloquent and so on top of things, such as Josh. I think you guys will really enjoy this podcast because I think there's some really good moments of insight that me as a viewer just was not able to glean. But speaking to Josh directly, I got to see a whole lot more of behind the scenes. I think you guys will really enjoy it. Let's get on to the interview. What is up? Wild Runs here, and today I have a very, very special guest that you probably already know, but if you don't, he is one of the co-hosts of one of the best disc golf podcasts I have ever seen and continues to be a great source of disc golf content, and that would be Josh Mansfield. What's up?
Thanks so much for having me on. I'm thrilled to be here. It's going to be a lot of fun.
All right. So right off the bat, for those that don't know, how did you get into the sport and how long have you been a part of the disc golf community?
Yeah, great question. So I started playing disc golf casually, really, when in 2017. I was in France for 2 years. Listeners of the Upshot mostly know. I lived in France for a couple of years, came back and went to school up in Montana, where the primary things that we had to do were outdoors. And so I got into disc golf and became an avid listener of the Upshot and a big fan of professional disc golf, and was playing all the time because that's the best thing I had to do in Helena, Montana. And so that's really what got me into it. Had some friends there who were really into the Pro Tour and introduced me to it. And so I got to see some really cool parts of the disc golf and the tour as it evolved, because this is right in the Steve Dodge transferring over then to Jeff Spring years, and got to watch the development and evolution of the tour. And I'm really glad that I was able to get in when I did any later, and I feel like I'd have missed on some of those developments. And so, I would say then about 6 years of disc golf for me.
Nice. Right on. And so you pivoted pretty hard from a PT director position into a city councilman, and you are currently city councilman of the Pocatello, Idaho community. Is that correct?
That is correct. So I that is a part-time position. I still am the PT. I'm the company director at Superior Physical Therapy, and I am on the Pocatello City Council.
Okay.
They feel very disconnected and two very different jobs, but that is correct. I am on the Pocatello City Council now.
And you have the third position of being a co-host of the podcast.
Correct. Nobody has ever accused me of not having enough to do.
And yeah, just piecing each one together. How did you get into PT? How did you get into the councilman and the podcast?
Yeah, so podcast actually came first. I went to college, and my degree was actually in international relations. But I went to college, and the college I chose was primarily to be a part of their competitive speech and debate program. And when Jamie Thomas left the show, excellent co-host, the one who was my predecessor in my position, Charlie said if anyone's interested in trying out for the show, to send him an email. And I thought that my enjoyment and interest in disc golf, my love of sports in general, as well as my speech and debate skills, all made for an interesting and a little bit different resume than your typical disc golf podcasts. And so I decided to apply it, and that's how I got the position. So I started doing that when I was in college. And after I finished with college, during COVID hit my junior year, end of junior year of college, and I watched what it did to academia. I watched professors get laid off at our university. I watched them get replaced with adjuncts. I watched a lot of courses move to online, and I decided that academia wasn't really where I wanted to be at the time. And my mom is someone who's long been in healthcare, and so I started asking her around for some contacts, people who I could start reaching out to, and just started calling people looking to see what kind of positions they had available in healthcare administration. And that's how I found my position in physical therapy. I am not a physical therapist. I had a steep learning curve, but I have a little bit of business background from my job in college, and so that's kind of how I landed there. Nice. I moved back to Pocatello in 2021, excuse me, May of 2021, after I graduate college, start my job. And I ended up getting involved in some budget meetings with the city council, and I got encouraged by some groups inside the city to run for city council, and didn't take them seriously until they started showing how much money they'd be willing to donate, and the different groups that were interested in donating in my campaign. And that's when I got a little more serious about it, and it worked out pretty well for me. So
when you say you got involved in budget meetings, how does somebody right out of college do that?
Yeah. So I actually just went to public testimony. We had some council members, and if you go pull these statements, I mean, you can tell there's no love lost between some of these council members. There were 3 council members who I really felt were not in the best interest of the city in lots of ways. And I knew some people who worked at the city. I had friends who worked in the city, and they asked me to just go and speak for 3 minutes and give public testimony during the hearing on the budget. So I went and made my comments, and I leave. And I didn't think anything of it, right? They asked me because they knew I did debate and they thought I would be a good speaker for their side. Great, no problem. So I left thinking, I actually went disc golfing after. Like that, I went and gave this public testimony, and then I went disc golfing and didn't think anything of it. And the next day I got a Facebook message from the president of the fire union, who asked if I'd be willing to meet with them and consider running for city council. And then the week after that, it was the police union that reached out. And the week after that, it was the labor council. And all of a sudden, I just had these groups lined up who were interested in supporting me. And I had no intention of running in August when I went and spoke. And so, I mean, the turnaround time was just very, very quick.
Yeah, that is awesome. And so let's see. It's been how long in that position so far?
Sure. It's 2 years since I've been elected. November of 2021 is when I got elected. I was sworn in on January of 2022. So a little over a year and a half at this point in the position.
Nice. And when is re-election?
So re-election would be in 2025. In November 2025. It's a 4-year term, so it's not something I have to worry about for the next little while.
So if you had to project right now, are you running for re-election?
Like a classic politician, I'm not sure. I'm not gonna have an answer for you right now. That's a decision I'll make with my family, and I really do enjoy the position, and it's just something that talking to Megan, my wife, and where we're at in our lives, if that's gonna be the best choice for me.
I was not expecting a political response in this interview. I love it. But yeah, that's awesome, man. That's so cool. All right, so on to the Upshot.
Yeah.
So I was also a follower of the Upshot for probably since like I got into like Joe Mez and everything, so probably like 2020.
Okay.
So I was following the podcast. I was like loving it so much. And like seeing that a new host we picked, I was a little bit apprehensive. So what were your expectations and thoughts going into becoming a host?
Sure. So we started with a 3-week trial period, and that's what Charlie promised me. So I applied, I think it was in January of that year, 2020, when I applied. COVID hadn't hit yet, and I applied, and I was 2020, 2019. I don't even remember what year I started on the Upshot. It's I think it was 2020. Might have been 2021, I think, actually, is what it. Anyway, I'm not gonna be able to tell you what year it is. It feels like time has flown by. I should know this answer, but I applied in January, and Charlie said, yeah, I've got a couple of co-hosts lined up who are just gonna guest host, and I'm gonna have you on as another guest host to do 3 weeks. And I was like, sick. You know what? Even if I just did 3 weeks, like that's something that'll be on the Spotify. I can show people, when I go to tournaments, I'll say, I was a guest host on the Upshot once. Let me show you. And, that's kind of what my expectations were coming out of this. And into those couple of weeks, Charlie said he had gotten a lot of good feedback, both on the Discord and on EV email, that people were really enjoying me as a host. And when I came in, like I said, it was being a guest host would have been absolutely exciting. But the biggest thing is I really enjoyed Charlie's perspective of somebody who is really like, Charlie is an outsider to the game. He's been in it longer than I have by complete, without a doubt. But he came from the Ultimate World and is also not one of those guys necessarily who is, the guys who disc golfed since the 90s, right? And that you kind of talk about and hear about sometimes with some of the professionals. So Charlie comes from this outside world, and I think, and that's something about it I've always appreciated about his perspective, is that he comes from an Ultimate World, another disc sport that has a very comprehensive competitive scene, both in college as well as club. And so he brought that perspective. His schooling is in economics in his background, and so he's always been talking about the business side, and that was a perspective that I appreciated and wanted to be a part of, because I think it's an aspect of disc golf that can be overlooked. We often like to focus on the the discs that we like to throw, the pros that we're fans of, and the Upshot does that too. But what I think the Upshot did and does better than any other podcast is talks about the business behind disc golf and analyzes the market trends and the way that the pros and their endorsements, manufacturers, and the Pro Tour and money interact with the sport of disc golf. And while that isn't our headline isn't the Upshot, the sport that covers all things money in disc golf. It covers all things professional disc golf, but it is an important element that I think has always set the Upshot apart, and that I wanted to be a part of as well.
Yeah, I can definitely echo that point, because there's so many points there's so many weeks where I'm listening to not to throw names, but Foundation, and they do a great job of recapping everything. Mm-hmm. But then I listen to the Upshot, and it's a totally different angle, and it's super refreshing, and it makes me feel a lot more informed. And sometimes Charlie's in the booth, so he sees a different angle there, and getting that wide perspective is something that I always look forward to. Whereas people that are just watching live like me, we don't know as much, we don't have the same information, so the Upshot is always a great source for that.
Thank you. I mean, that's something that Charlie, I think, has always emphasized really well, and is a big strength of his.
Yeah. So going into it, what were your initial thoughts of Charlie, and now a couple years past, how do you think you view Charlie as a just person, co-host, friend?
Absolutely. So when I went in, Charlie was somebody who in a way felt kind of larger than life, in the sense that it was very difficult for me up front to try and challenge some of Charlie's views. And I think you'll hear in early episodes that I just agreed with Charlie a lot, because they made sense to me. And and the other part that I think was actually interesting, and this is by no means something that Charlie did, but to me, this is Charlie's show, and I need to kind of orbit around Charlie, and I need to try and support Charlie however I can so that Charlie's show is successful. And he actually talked to me probably 6 months in, and he said, look, I don't want you to disagree with me for disagreement's sake, but the people here on the show don't have two of us so that you can just parrot and echo and be a like button to everything I say. You need to be more direct and engaging with some of your points that are in opposite or just different than mine, and add that perspective. That's why we have a co-host on this show. And so I still absolutely think of the Upshot and Ultiworld as a Charlie product, but I see the shows as ours now, and each show is a collaborative process with both of us. And there have been times when I've been the host and brought on a co-host because Charlie was on vacation or covering other events, and I've really tried to foster that kind of environment and attitude that Charlie has done so as well. That every show we do together is our show, and I need to make sure that I'm bringing my own flavor, my own perspectives, and that's something that I really respected about Charlie, because it was difficult for me to do when I first started on the Upshot. Now I consider Charlie a good friend of mine. We love to, we have text messages that we're just chatting about Pro Tour things that are happening, and outside sports. And so it's something that I would say that Charlie and I can really relate over sports a lot. I think we have a very similar perspective of sports in general. And so I consider him a good friend in the area, in the sports world. And I really enjoy the sense of, I guess, equality that I feel from him on the show. And that's something that I respect him a lot for.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I could totally see where you're at early on, being that was a great point he just made. I don't know how to add on to that, because he's so comprehensive when he explains things.
He is.
I would also notice he'd be yep. Moving on to the next topic.
Yeah.
But yeah, you've done a great job of becoming more of kind of speech and debate is how I kind of perceive it. Even if you don't, I perceive sometimes when you are arguing a point, you do believe it somewhat, but you also just want to add on to the conversation. And so you add a counterpoint. I think that really helps to add more variety to the show.
No, thank you.
So for you, I know there's so many points where you're recording the Patreon in your car, and you're just doing whatever you can to maintain coverage, and be an educated consumer. Is it ever too much? Are you ever just man, I just want to have a chill weekend, and this is just so much work that like I'm sure you don't make a ton of money off of.
Yeah, actually. So and it's actually less the weekends now. I used to, the weekends are actually an easier part. The two things that are difficult. Number one, so I record the show at 6 a.m. Mountain Time because
Oh
I've got to
wow.
get it done before work starts. So we're recording at 6 a.m. Mountain Time twice a week, basically every week. And there are some weeks that's difficult, right? Work is
Yeah.
busy. Whatever else is going on in my life, I'm not, I didn't get the sleep that I needed, and getting up for the Upshot is difficult sometimes. And it's funny because, um, when Charlie and I have some vacations and times during the summer, and when we take a vacation, when I'm coming back to the Upshot, I'm like, oh man, I kind of drag my feet a little bit, and then
Mm.
I do it, and I sit in the chair and I start recording, and I love it. And
Yeah.
it's even if the night before I was just incredibly grumpy that I had to do it the next day, the second I hit that chair, I'm just so thrilled to record and talk disc golf. I remember that I really just get an opportunity to do what I love, which is talk about disc golf and sports.
Yeah.
Um, the hardest part I would say is trying to make the time to, as you mentioned, and this the good word here is like the educated part, right? Making sure that I can engage with as much of the tournaments as possible, because there are some weekends where that is not feasible, and so I'm doing everything I can to watch Jomez on 2x from the day before,
Mm.
and I'm checking UDisc, and I'm looking up stats on UDisc and stat Mando, because I really didn't have a lot of time to watch live coverage, and that can be difficult. And there are things that happen in live coverage that get cut out of Jomez, especially chase card things, and
Yeah.
so it's difficult. And I literally will go and watch socials to see if there are storylines I missed, so that I can go back and double check coverage to make sure I didn't miss some sort of off-camera action or something that isn't necessarily going to be featured on Jomez on those weekends when I was a little bit busier.
Yeah. Yeah. I'm sure you don't know much about my content, but I do like pretty quick, thorough recaps, like between 5 to 7 minutes. And I've been in the same spot where it's like I want to be educated, but I'm like driving to like my wife's parents, and that's like a crazy
Yeah.
drive. And then when I'm driving, I may not even get service. So I be maybe wanting to watch coverage, but I just don't have the ability to, and that's a pain. And I'm still like in the early stages of the business, so I'm not
Mm-hmm.
really, nobody really sees like my business goals right now. So there's just a lot of growing pains as I'm trying to start this thing.
I can't tell you the number of truck stops that I have recorded the Upshot in. And I didn't mention this, but when we did the reacts from European Open, I pulled over at a boat launch on the river, and it was like 95 degrees or 97 degrees out. I didn't want to sit in my car and just run it. So I grabbed a blanket and I went and sat with my feet in the river while I recorded the European Open rapid reacts.
Oh
Uh,
my goodness.
After I had previously finished watching the round, at a truck stop, and I pulled over and had breakfast out, like parked in a truck stop, so I could finish the MPO round, and then later recorded it at a boat dock on the side of a river. So I
That's
completely
dedication.
understand. Yes, you do what you need to, and I understand that. And it's a lot of fun.
All right. So hearing that, what is your wife's opinion on like the whole podcast and the lengths you'll go to be educated?
She'll give me a hard time. It's nice because she enjoys watching disc golf with me.
That's huge.
She enjoys disc golf. She plays disc golf. She watches disc golf. That's a huge deal, and definitely helps. Sunday afternoons when we're watching rounds, we'll pull out board games and we'll just have it on, and so I can watch and keep an eye on the TV and watch it, and she'll be engaged here and there. But that's something she's good with. As long as I do a good job of planning the family events around it, then I'm in the clear. It's when I have to step away from family dinner with my family or her family because I need to go record and I didn't schedule it well with Charlie. That's when I get the little side eye when I come back to the table.
Oh yeah. Yeah, actually I just had my wife watching Ledgestone, and she was like, man, this like Ella person seems really cool, and like she's great. I was like, yeah, she's done this and this, and like getting her a little bit more involved was good. But she still doesn't really care. But
No,
that's okay.
that's all right. One day you'll get there.
Actually, you guys said that she had like her best round ever this past weekend, and I was like, hey, she's like killing it right now, and she was actually like kind of like she was happy about that. But when
you,
she's
you
watching
got
live, she's like, Will they start like doing something? It doesn't really seem
Oh,
that
right.
interesting.
It can feel slow. It can feel slow. And
Yeah.
it probably looks like golf to a lot of people, right? Until they
Yeah.
understand the nuance and like the excitement of disc golf. It probably does have a pace similar to golf. And so it's a battle to get people into that.
Yeah. Um, so touching on to that, I have probably watched more FPO than like 99% of people, but I still kind of um, feel like there's some tournaments where it is a little bit hard to get a new viewer, for instance, to be watching, let's say, um, like a smaller tournament where Kristin is just totally dominating. Nobody's even really close. How do you one become like educated about that when you know the outcome's kind of already predetermined, and how do you think a new viewer can stay motivated to watching a tournament like that where it's not necessarily who's going to win? There's like a lot more storylines than that, if that makes
Yeah.
sense.
Yeah, that's a great question. I think that there's something that we take for granted at times is when you look at Kristin and the greatness that she exudes right now, like that is a storyline that people like to engage with. I'm not going to get into the FPO, GOAT debate because I think Paige still holds that title. But when you have someone like Kristin who performs at a top level, it's the same reason that you have fans of other sports who have been drawn in and engaged based on the personality and just like the greatness of the personality of some players. Tiger Woods brought people over to golf that because they wanted to just watch Tiger, even if he's blowing people out of the water. There are plenty of players who can attract that kind of attention. And Kristin's greatness in and of itself is a storyline, especially for newer viewers. If you sit down and say, look how great she is, especially compared to the field, look at what makes her excellent. Watch how good she is like that. It's hard for us sometimes because the novelty wears off. Right.
Yeah.
And it's especially like you said, in those smaller tournaments, it's like, well, Kristin wins. She wins by 8 strokes, and now we're going to talk about MPO. And that's, I mean, I can't tell you how many times that's kind of been the approach on the Upshot because when she's just so dominant, it loses the novelty and the intrigue and the storylines around her. And as much as we want to say that second place is important, it's hard to engage people in those storylines. And you're absolutely right on that. So for new people, though, I think you just have to build Kristin up as someone who's making a run for creating some of the most dominant stretch of disc golf in the modern era, and build that excitement that draws people into other sports when they watch greatness take place. And that's kind of how I see it on that side with Kristin. As for me, I think there's a lot of interest. We are engaged much more than other people in the storylines down the leaderboard. And so even if it is Kristin winning, there are things that we can watch for and how that plays into the rest of the season. But, I'll be honest with you. I don't think I watched more than 10 minutes of the FPO final round of European Open. And that's just how it
ended
is.
up being crazy.
I might miss, and I quickly scroll through socials and I see if there's any moments I missed, kind of like I'd mentioned. But it's sometimes hard to stay engaged in that, and that's kind of okay, right? And there are feats that are going to be impressive, and you can bet that I'll watch every round of Worlds, both MPO and FPO. And if Kristin wins Worlds, I'll especially be watching the US Women's Championship even final round, because then we're talking about the calendar Grand Slam and some exciting storylines in there. But it's kind of a juggling act in terms of enjoying those storylines sometimes.
Yeah, I actually just had like small revelation. So I'm a Kansas City Chiefs fan, and there's a bunch of games where it's like we're gonna blow out the other team. We do blow out the other team. There's nothing that interesting about it. So it's not just like a FPO thing. It's just throughout all sports you're gonna have these instances.
Yeah, it's sports, and it's a problem that other sports have to deal with a lot. Like I like to very casually follow lots of sports, and just like I have scores updates on my phone for lots of sports, including Formula One. And I don't follow Formula One particularly closely, but I also know that Max Verstappen, I'm not exactly sure it's pronounced, is running laps around the league. And like there are posts and like news articles written about how people disengage and their viewership is down at times from Formula One because he's just winning by so much. And when he's 30 seconds ahead of second place, like it's hard to get fans and convince fans that they should stay interested. So it's a sports problem. It absolutely is.
Pivoting a little bit. So I don't know if I fully get the origin, but there's been a lot of Calvin hate from you. What's the origin of that?
So I want to clear a few things out in the air. Number one, I really do like Calvin as a person. I think he's a great person.
You're speaking politically again. I like
You're right. I am. I think Calvin's a great person, and I think he's a really fun player to watch. The hate really comes from the sense that when it was probably 2 to 3 years ago, like Calvin and Eagle looked like this duo that was poised to take over the disc golf world. And there were battles and times that like when Calvin won the Hall of Fame Classic and the Las Vegas Challenge, in the same year, that was the year that you really were like, wow, like Calvin can really accelerate. And it's crazy because you have Calvin, who is just an incredibly consistent and dominant player, but feels like he lacks the X factor at times, and especially in the greatest moments of the sport in the majors. And there are players, and it's a storyline that plenty of players have been given a hard time for in other sports. The one that I think of, like, the jokes about Charles Barkley never getting a ring, right? Like that's a joke that is pervasive throughout the NBA, and there are going to be players in disc golf. And right now, I think that all the top names of the sport have done so because of their performance at the majors, and the establishment of the tour and the kind of the professionalization of the tour has created a sense where, like, it's easier to see a dominant player who doesn't necessarily have to win the majors in order to be seen as dominant. So Calvin, he can be seen as somebody who's just like incredible and is playing amazing, but the lack of majors, like, that will be the storyline that writes his career. And I don't want that to be. I want Calvin to get a win, but I'm going to give him a hard time until he does. And Charlie's a big Calvin fan as well. And so, that goes a little bit to the point of where Charlie and I do not see eye to eye necessarily. And it's really funny because I get a lot of hate for the Calvin hate in the Discord, in comments. Like, people give me a really hard time about not giving Calvin enough credit. And at the end of last tournament, we finished up D-Glow, and there were three or four people in the Discord in the Rapid Reacts who said, we had just were like, Calvin was really kind of a non-factor this weekend. Dickerson had a good weekend. Like, we just breezed over it. And several people in the Discord said, you're being too soft on Calvin. Like, he should be winning more. And so I think people are coming around to my point. I may have been a little early to, and jumping the gun, but it comes from a sense of, like, he is an amazing player who really could be having and could be in a position. There's no reason that if Calvin could have won 4 times or 5 times to this point, including a major, the question wouldn't be, oh, is Paul McBeth passing the torch this year? Right now, the discussion is Paul McBeth's not having a great season. Ricky's not having a great season. Lots of young players are up and coming, and so it feels like the wealth and the success is distributed. If Calvin had won twice as much as he's won this season, and then been as consistent as he's been, it would be, okay, great. The Paul McBeth torch is being passed to Calvin. Like that could be the storyline. That's how good Calvin is, but he doesn't win enough, and he is not winning enough right now, and he has not won a major, and that's unfortunately going to hinder his career. I will say I probably was rooting harder for Calvin than just about anybody else at USDGC in 2021. Was the year Dickerson won?
Yep.
Yeah. When he was making that crazy comeback in hurricane-like weather, man, I was absolutely rooting for him there. And I still will, not this season because I have a bet with Charlie and I don't, that I would have to go out to New York. So Calvin's not getting any of my fan vote this season at the majors, but next season I'll root for him again.
Yeah. Me and my friend always just put up some coverage, and we were watching 2015 Worlds, and Calvin was up there fighting for the lead. And even back then he had blow poles and there was just no consistency, but I think he's definitely improved a lot since then. But just majors, I have this image in my head of 2021 Worlds and final round. I don't know what his actual score was, but it was just not even close to getting a top spot, even though he was within 3 strokes of the lead starting the day. And there's just so many instances like that where it's hard to argue. He just kind of has that Simon factor where you just can't get a major. He
does, and it hurts, and I want him to get it. And But I'm gonna keep giving Calvin a hard time till he gets the major. That's the hump he's got to get over. Especially like Greg Barsu's got a major. James Conrad's got 2 of them. Like Simon has the curse a little bit as well, like we've talked about. But Eagles got some. Like there are lots of players who I think Calvin is probably a as good as or better player than, and doesn't have majors. And it's hard.
So if you could attest it to like one particular factor, do you think it's nerves? What do you think it is?
It's a good question. It feels to me, and I said this actually in the Rapid Reacts after round 3 of the European Open, is it feels like Calvin very often does not get the hot start that he needs. And I don't know if it's like a warm-up issue, if it's a nerves issue, if it's, but it often feels to me that Calvin, he's not like he doesn't choke, right? Same thing. Think about Worlds back in 2021. No, was that all Utah? Yeah, 2021.
Yeah, Utah.
Yeah. Think about Utah Worlds, for example. Calvin was in the mix and just came out absolutely flat. European Open this year came out flat. So even when he's in contention, when he comes into the final round of a major, it feels like more often than not, he comes out significantly slower than he needs to, which puts himself in a much harder tournament than he needs to be in. He falls back or loses a lead in the case of European Open, and that's going to increase pressure. It's going to exacerbate mistakes that you have, and that was something that I had talked about prior to that final round, and that's exactly what happened. I mean, he came out like 1 under through 5, and at that point he's passed. He's got multiple people ahead of him, and now you're chasing, and that's a hard place to be playing from, because it's not just that you're chasing and you're 2 strokes behind. And you come into the day 2 strokes behind, but you're ready to push. It's that you came into the lead, lost the lead. They have momentum, and you've got to both earn the momentum back as well as catch back up. And that's a hard place to play from. And I think that's Calvin's biggest problem, is that when he gets into final or late rounds, he comes out too flat in early parts of rounds, and that takes him out of contention too often.
Yeah. But I think one thing that I've noticed, and this is pure speculation, but earlier this season, and definitely last weekend where he got some crazy throw-ins, is he's shown a lot more just quote unquote tenacity. And I feel like he has a lot more focus in those final rounds. And it seems like he is able to fight those like final round demons that he was dealing with in previous seasons, where like now I feel like if he's in the final round, sure, he may not be winning, but he's putting up a lot more of a fight than he did in the past. And so I think that's definitely a good sign for the future. That's pure speculation, but I think things are changing for him.
It's progress. I hope you're right. I absolutely hope you're right. There aren't many players who I actively root against their success. That list is actually quite small, and I promise Calvin is not on that list.
I also have one of those lists, but definitely not going to share that. All right. Let's see. So you have been basically like a content creator for like 2 years. I'm sure you don't classify yourself as like a content creator, but you kind of are. Sure. So what would be like the peak of your last 2 years in the spotlight, being a podcast host, being exposed to so much more in the disc golf world than like us normies?
Yeah, that's a really good question. I think there's I'll say there's 2 things. Number one, we knew about the Simon contract earlier than we actually let on. It was because we had to confirm things, right? That's something that you're going to see on the Upshot, is that, we don't have necessarily a set and hard policy about when we do or don't talk about things, but we aren't, Charlie, I think there's a lot of credit for this, is we try not to just jump at rumors. And even if those rumors seem to have some good credibility or belief behind them, we don't jump at those. And so I knew about the Simon stuff. I don't remember how far in advance, but in advance enough that like I felt like, oh, okay, I'm in the know. Like people are gonna lose their mind, and that was really fun to see. Like on Reddit, people were like, Simon would never leave Discmania, and that's never gonna happen. Like and to already know like that was something that was really funny to me. I'd say the other part is I have gotten to meet so many people that I don't think I otherwise would have, and that doesn't just mean pros, right? I met Sean Jack, who is, I think his title is the vice president of sales or partnerships at the Disc Golf Pro Tour. Sorry, Sean, I know I probably butchered that, but I met him at Worlds in 2021 and got to meet and talk to him about kind of some of that backside of the Disc Golf Pro Tour and the way those partnerships work. And that was a lot of fun. And that's something that's enjoyable to me. And, I had a bond, like a relationship as friends with like Steve Hill and Jamie Thomas that comes from being a part of the Upshot that they were a part of once. Yeah. And, even though I probably would never have met those guys in any other way, I get to meet some just really incredible people. There's some, Ultiworld staff that are just amazing and people who I haven't even met in person who I really enjoy getting to interact and be a part of. And so meeting people who I otherwise would not have had the opportunity to, mainly because, they probably didn't want to meet me before I was an uninteresting normie is in the word you use, right? Yeah. And so getting to meet those people have definitely been the high spots for me throughout the Ultiworld experience.
So just to wrap up here a little bit, so seeing where you're at with like disc golf and that you're getting pretty involved in the pro tour and everything, if you had to say right now, are there any aspirations to go any deeper and maybe be a part of the disc golf pro tour, or are you pretty happy with where you're at right now?
Yeah, for now, I'm really content with where I'm at. I think a lot of pro tour responsibilities and jobs do require more travel or relocation in my case, and while that may be an interest one day, I think my wife and I are pretty happy being close to family. So for now, I'm very happy with my current positions as well at in physical therapy, and so not planning on going anymore or doing any more at this time.
Yeah. Seeing how Charlie is kind of affiliated with the Disc Golf Pro Tour, do you think there's ever a world where your podcast could be like the official podcast of the Disc Golf Pro Tour or have some affiliation?
Yeah. There's a possibility, and that I think that's a business decision more than it is a solely podcast decision, and one that goes back to Charlie's ownership of Ultiworld as a company and Ultiworld Disc Golf and then the podcast as a whole. So that's a call a lot more in Charlie's camp. But the one thing I would say, and I can't speak by any limitations, but even though Charlie is affiliated, one thing that I think we are pretty good about is being very frank about our feelings about the Pro Tour. And if there are decisions that are made that we don't fully agree with, then that's something that we're not afraid to express. And while we try and always enjoy our partnerships and the opportunity we have to interview Jeff Spring and those things, I think something that I really value about Ultiworld and the Upshot is it's to me the most journalistic of the podcasts that gets the facts and is willing to speak a little bit more objectively about those things. And I would worry about that being compromised if we were, for example, the official podcast of the Pro Tour.
Yeah, I totally agree. And there's so many moments where I'm like, I'm really glad that Charlie's in the spot where he's not hindered. He can still be a host or like a commentator, but he can also be separately on the podcast saying things that he truly believes.
Yep.
So more to your personal disc golf life. How much disc golf are you playing nowadays? How many tournaments are you able to play? All that.
This summer was a little bit busier. Work was just real busy. We and had a couple of things. So I haven't played nearly as much this summer. Right now I'm playing probably once every other week. Playing 2 or 3 tournaments this year. Yeah. I usually in most summers I'm playing like at least once a week, but usually 2 to 3 times a week. And it's just been busy this year. I get a decent amount of golf in the winter though. Actually, like we play weekend doubles, and it can be, I know last year we played one that was 10 below and there was a foot of fresh snow, and we went out and we played disc golf in it. So it actually is, summer's been busy for work, and so haven't played nearly as much as I typically do.
Yeah. Wow. So you went to the Zootown Open, right?
I was going to. I did not. I was unable to go though, unfortunately. Yeah.
Okay. But you know the course, and
I know the course. Yep. I played Blue Mountain. I love the course. It's a lot of fun to play.
So looking at how that tournament played out and like the unique shot shapes, do you think there's a spot for that type of disc golf to be like an elite series or to be more prevalent on tour?
Absolutely. The biggest consideration that we have to look at is facilities.
Yep.
There is absolutely room for spectators. And I think that mountain golf actually enjoys some of the benefits that we talked about with D-Glow this past week, is that elevation actually lends itself to spectating really, really well, because you can stand at the green. And if it's a 100-foot drop in elevation, standing at the green gives you a full flight, like a full view of the entire flight of the disc.
Yeah.
And so I think mountain golf is actually holds some of the best spectatorship opportunities. The problem, though, is service is really difficult in a lot of these places, and parking is oftentimes limited. So
Yep.
you have to facilitate shuttling of spectators, and that's what Blue Mountain did, and that's what I think a lot of mountain courses are going to have to do. And then you really are going to have to pick areas that have strong cell signal and connections in order to ensure that you can do the live stream. If you overcome those barriers, though, I think there should absolutely be a full mountain course on the Pro Tour in an Elite Series event. And there are, especially like in Utah, lots of courses that are on ski resorts, and you take the ski lift up to the top and play down the mountain. And it's some real elevation challenges, and I think would be well featured on an Elite Series event.
Yeah. That's the thing about so many of these cool courses. They're like a Silver Series, so you don't necessarily get like the full breadth of like players, and it's still an awesome event. But there's so many moments where I was like, man, if there was just like a Ricky or a Paul fighting the contenders, it would be a lot more exciting to be a viewer. But it was still awesome.
Absolutely.
I at Kansas City Wide Open, I talked to one of the Disc Golf Pro Tour guys, and they had like a remote cell tower on hole 16 that allowed them to get like the wooded holes for 16, 17, 18. And so that gave me a lot of hope that we might get some like actually wooded golf. And we're
one
not
day.
One day. And they were just testing it out. It was not confirmed to be like actually good for coverage. But yeah, do you think there's eventually going to be 50-50 wooded and non-wooded on the Pro Tour?
I actually don't. Even if you fix the cell coverage issues, when you get into a lot of wooded courses, a lot of them really struggle with spectatorship, spectators and getting in enough spectators. I think that it is possible, but it requires a couple of things. Number one, obviously coverage and cell coverage has to be addressed. But number two is you have to get enough money into the sport that it doesn't depend on spectator tickets. Right. And that ticket sales are not the primary thing that give us added cash. And you need spectators who are you need sponsors who are just dumping money in. And so maybe there's only 3 or 4 holes that are really the fan zone. And it's all about, the fly mart that's there and getting to play the C tier that happens on the Monday after, and, all the other things around it, because you're limited. You put up, big jumbotrons and the huge screens that they brought at some tournaments that are all over the place and is showing the DGN, because it's just you don't need the spectators to help fill the purse, and you can just spend sponsor money. I think those are the two things that need to happen before we could even begin to talk about a 50-50 split in the wooded and open.
Yeah. I just went to like a quote unquote cheap concert, and I was like, this is like the same price as like a VIP ticket to like the Pro Tour.
Yeah.
It's just so totally different. The markets are just not there yet for disc golf to like be able to have true funding.
Yep. That's absolutely the case.
Can't wait till I get like a Nike sponsorship someday.
Right. One day.
All right. Last question. World's picks. Who are you taking for your podium finish?
Okay. So, you want my podium? You want 3 and 3? Okay. I will. I can't give away the farm, so I'll tell you I'm picking Kristin. I'm picking Kristin to win. That's for sure. I will have Ricky and Gannon both on my podium. Ricky and Gannon, and that's something I've been thinking a lot about, and I'm gonna have, unless barring some injury or something we don't know about on either of them, Ricky and Gannon will be on my podium. I don't know where yet. I don't know who the third will be, but I'll tell you that's who's on my podium, and I'm picking Kristin to win. So there's the teaser. You're gonna have to tune into the Upshot if you want to hear the full picks.
I was just thinking, I'm sure you guys are going to talk about this soon.
Yeah, it's coming up. It's coming up real fast. So
yeah. All right. Awesome.